solve problems using relationships between angles formed by intersecting lines. So let's do a review. You did some of these yesterday with supplementary and complementary. So first of all, can you tell me which one is which? Well, this would be a complementary angle because it's 90 degrees, and this would be supplementary because it's 180. So in order to find out the missing, I could take 90 minus 40 and get 50. So this missing angle is 50 degrees. So let's go find this one, supplementary, 180 minus 28. And yes, I'm fine if you use a calculator, but go ahead and do it right now, is 152 degrees. So I want you to go find these two now. The measure of an angle is 175.6. What's the measure of its supplementary angle? And the measure is 62. What's the measure of its complementary angle? Come back when you are done. Supplementary again means 180. So I got to take 180 minus 175.6. Line up my decimal points because I'm adding or subtracting. I have to borrow. I'm going to make this a 10, but then I have to borrow to make it a 9 and make this a 10. 10 minus 6 is 4. Bring down the decimal. 9 minus 5 is 4. The supplementary angle is 4.4 degrees. Complementary is 90. So 90 minus 62. And yes, make sure you wrote it down so you have it even if you used a calculator, is 28 degrees would be its supplement. So today we're going to learn a couple more vocabulary words, but first I want you to draw two intersecting lines. All right, so let's go back to wherever you have your vocabulary, and we're going to learn adjacent, vertical, and congruent today. Adjacent angles are next to each other, so they share a vertex and a side. And let's write the words next to. It's like your neighbor. They're right next to you. You share maybe a lot line between the two of you. Okay, so share a vertex and a side. They're next door neighbors. I always think next door neighbors, next to each other. Vertical is opposite of each other or across from each other. So if I look at two angles to be adjacent, well, if they share a vertex and a side, these two angles would be adjacent because they share that vertex and this side. I like to think of vertical angles, they make two V's. A vertical, see a V and a V. These two angles, so this angle and this angle are vertical of each other. So they make two lines, or intersecting lines. Do you see how these two, or even these two, just make a wider V across from each other? V for vertical. Congruent means that they are just the same size, the same angle with the same measurement. There's a symbol for congruent to make it a shortcut. It looks like an equal sign with a little squiggle on top. That means those are congruent angles. They're the same size. I should say the same angle. So if you look at adjacent angles can be lots of different sizes. They could be really small with a bigger one, and then these two are adjacent. Cool thing is vertical angles though are congruent. So let's put that little symbol there. So let's look at some. I had you draw in the picture on your notebook. So this is what I have. So using your picture to look at, which two on here are vertical angles? You could say the smiley face to the rainbow. You could say the little stars to the daisy. So let's number yours and yours. And let's say A, B, C, and D, or letter yours. All right, so I'm going to ask you some questions and see if you can write them down before I give you the answer. Give me any two adjacent angles. Any two adjacent angles. Okay, you could have had A to B, angle A to angle B to angle C. They're just next to each other. Angle C to angle D to angle A. They're next door neighbors. Now if I ask you, can you give me any angles that are vertical? Okay, so you have angle D to angle B, kind of like we already had here, and angle A to angle C. Remember, these are also congruent angles to each other. All right, a few more new words. This is where it gets a little confusing. Corresponding. Corresponding angles. Let's get the definition and then we'll look at what it means. They're angles in the same position. So if you draw two parallel lines and we just look at these are in the same position. So let's come back to our drawing. Don't worry about it right now. I want you to draw two parallel lines on your paper. Then you're going to draw a line that cuts through it. This line, let's label it just so you've heard the word, and I want it in your notes, is a transversal. It cuts through two parallel lines. Remember, parallel never touch. So when I say angles in the same position, do you see this angle right there? This only works on parallel lines. You see this angle right here. Do you see how it's on the top of the parallel lines and to the right? Well, if I slide that down, do you see how it's in the same spot? They're in the same position. So those two angles would be corresponding. Let's look at another one. If I do it a different color, let's do this one right here. So if I slide that down, it's the exact same one there. So I slide them down. I could go the other way and I could go on the bottom here. Let's look at this nice big one right here. If I slide that one up this time, do you see how it's right there? And the cool part about corresponding angles is they're the same size. They're congruent. So we can write the word congruent again. So let's make sure we get same angle and same position and we get a picture. But I want to add one more thing. This only happens at same angle and same position on parallel lines. Remember, that's the symbol for parallel. So it only happens on parallel lines. Don't forget that word transversal. All right, you can go start your assignment.